the crime, and the disposal most killers panic. In the immediate aftermath of a double homicide, the human brain usually goes into fight or flight mode. Adrenaline spikes. Hands shake. Rational thought is replaced by a primal need to survive the next 10 minutes. Mistakes are made in this window of hysteria. Fugitives run red lights, they call friends in tears, or they flee the state with a packed bag and a stolen credit card. But Chandler Halderson didn't run. He didn't flee the state of Wisconsin. He didn't even leave the house. Instead, he stayed inside that beautiful suburban home in Windsor for days, surrounded by the bodies of the parents he had just executed. He slept in his bed. He ate food from the refrigerator. He watched movies. To the outside world, the house on the quiet street looked exactly the same as it always had. The lawn was manicured, the cars were in the driveway, and the blinds were drawn. But inside, the air was heavy with the metallic scent of blood and the impending chemical sting of bleach. What followed wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a sudden snap of anger that ended in tragedy. It was a cold, calculated, and terrifyingly patient attempt to erase two human beings from existence. Chandler realized that he couldn't just hide the bodies of Bart and Krista Halderson. He had to unmake them. He had to destroy them. And for that, he turned to the family fireplace. To understand how a 23-year-old man could reach this point of moral absolute zero, we have to look at the life he was pretending to live. Windsor, Wisconsin, is the kind of place people move to when they want safety. It is a place of peace, good schools, and neighbors who wave to one another. The Haldersons were pillars of this community. Bart, at 50 years old, was a devoted father and a diligent accountant. He was a man of details, a man who believed in hard work and integrity. He had been a scoutmaster, guiding his sons Mitchell and Chandler through the ranks of the Boy Scouts, teaching them responsibility and honor. Krista, 53, was the heart of the family. She was kind, generous, and utterly devoted to her boys. She worked in customer service, but her true vocation was being a mother. They had done everything right. They had raised their sons to be successful, independent men. Mitchell, the older brother, had followed that path. He was engaged, working in tech, and living on his own. That left Chandler. To the outside observer, Chandler was the golden boy. He was the success story that every parent dreams of sharing at dinner parties. According to Chandler, he was finishing a rigorous degree in renewable resource engineering at Madison College. He told his parents he was attending classes remotely and in person, pulling late nights to finish complex projects on solar energy and fluid dynamics. But the academic success was just the beginning of the lie. Chandler told his parents, his brother, and his girlfriend, Catherine, that he had landed a job that was 1 in a million. He claimed he had been hired by SpaceX. Yes, Elon Musk's aerospace company. He spun a tale of a high-stakes interview process, of being selected for his brilliance in engineering. He told them he was already working remotely for the company and that, eventually, he would be relocating to Florida to work at Cape Canaveral on the rockets themselves. It was a dazzling lie. It was the kind of lie that makes parents puff out their chests with pride. Bart and Krista told everyone. They were planning his move. They were looking at apartments in Florida with him online. They were so proud of the man he had become. But there was another layer to the deception. Chandler also claimed to be a member of the police scuba dive team, specifically for the Department of Natural Resources. He told thrilling stories of underwater evidence recovery, of training in freezing lakes, of being an essential part of law enforcement. He bought the gear. He had the lanyards. He created a reality so detailed that no one thought to question it. Why would they? Why would a son lie about something so easily verifiable? The truth, however, was a void. Chandler Halderson wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a scuba diver. He wasn't an employee of SpaceX. He was a college dropout who had flunked out of Madison College semesters ago. He was unemployed, spending his days in his childhood bedroom playing video games like Escape from Tarkov and constructing an elaborate paper trail of forgeries to keep his parents in the dark. He created hundreds of fake emails. He invented personas, people like Omar Joff and Alyssa H. at the college administration. He would sit at his computer for hours, emailing himself back and forth, creating evidence of administrative errors and server crashes to explain why his transcripts weren't available or why his salary from SpaceX hadn't hit his bank account yet. It was a full-time job of deception. But the problem with the House of Cards is that eventually the wind blows. And in June of 2021, the wind began to pick up. Bart Halderson, being an accountant, was a man who noticed discrepancies. He noticed that Chandler seemed to be struggling with money despite having this high-paying job. He noticed that the college tuition he had given Chandler hadn't seemed to clear the right accounts. Chandler spun more webs. He claimed the college was holding his money, that there was a glitch in the SpaceX payroll system. He showed Bart the fake emails. But Bart wanted to help. That was his fatal mistake. He loved his son, and he wanted to fix these administrative injustices. He told Chandler, "I'll call the college myself. We'll get this sorted out." This was Chandler's nightmare. If Bart made one phone call, the entire universe Chandler had built would collapse. Chandler tried to stall. He said the phone lines were down. He said only email worked. He produced more fake transcripts. But Bart was persistent. On the morning of Thursday, July 1st, 2021, the ultimatum was set. Bart had arranged a meeting at the college. He was going to drive Chandler there personally, walk into the administration office, and demand answers about his son's graduation and tuition. That afternoon, Bart returned home around 2 p.m. We know this from the timeline reconstructed later. He walked into the house, likely ready to take his son to the school to fight for him. He sent Chandler a text message shortly before arriving. It read, "I'm ready to leave as soon as you get here." It was the last text Bart Halderson would ever send. What happened next inside the Halderson home is a scene of intimate betrayal. Chandler knew that the car ride to the college would be the end of his life as he knew it. Exposure was minutes away. So instead of grabbing his coat, he grabbed a weapon. At some point in the afternoon, while his father was likely distracted or turning away, Chandler Halderson shot him. He used a surplus SKS rifle, a weapon he had been gifted. The shot ended Bart's life instantly, but it began the horror for Chandler. He now had a body in the house. But his mother, Krista, was still at work. She would be home around 5 p.m. For 3 hours, Chandler waited. He didn't run. He didn't call the police and claim an accident. He waited for the woman who gave him birth to walk through the door. When Krista arrived home, expecting a normal evening with her husband and son, she walked into an ambush. Chandler shot her too. In the span of an afternoon, the golden boy had become a family annihilator. This is where the story shifts from tragedy to the truly macabre. Neighbors would later report seeing smoke coming from the Halderson chimney. In the middle of July, in high summer heat, it didn't make sense. Wisconsin's summers are humid and hot. A fireplace is the last thing anyone uses. But inside the house, Chandler was engaged in a gruesome task. He realized that two adult bodies are heavy, difficult to move, and impossible to hide in a suburban neighborhood. He decided he had to reduce them to ash. He began the process of dismemberment. He took the bodies of his parents to the basement, or perhaps kept them in the living room, and used tools to take them apart. He then began to burn them. He did this while playing video games, while texting his girlfriend, while living his normal life. He would pause his game, stoke the fire, add more logs, and perhaps add another part of the people who raised him. The psychological detachment required to do this is almost unfathomable. But the human body is difficult to destroy completely, especially in a residential fireplace. It is not a crematorium. The heat required to turn bone to ash is immense, far beyond what a decorative hearth can provide. At some point during this process, the heat became so intense that the glass on the fireplace shattered. A piece of that glass sliced into Chandler's foot. Remember this detail. This small cut on his toe, a minor injury in the grand scheme of a double homicide, would become a massive piece of evidence later on. It was the physical mark of his crime, a receipt stamped onto his own flesh. He realized the fireplace wasn't enough. The smell was becoming overpowering, a thick, greasy, unmistakable scent that he tried to mask with cleaning chemicals. He needed to scatter the evidence. He needed a remote location. So he used the one person who still trusted him implicitly, his girlfriend, Catherine. On the weekend of July 3rd, the 4th of July weekend, Chandler asked Catherine if they could go to her family's property near the Wisconsin River. It was a large plot of land, heavily wooded with a river running through it. He told her he wanted to help out with some chores, maybe do some swimming. To Catherine, it sounded like a nice gesture from a boyfriend who was stressed about his new job and family issues. She agreed. Chandler loaded his car, but in the trunk, packed alongside his swim trunks, a cooler of drinks, and his overnight bag were heavy-duty garbage bags. Bags containing what was left of Bart and Krista Halderson. He drove with his girlfriend in the passenger seat, chatting, listening to music, all while the dismembered remains of his parents sat just a few feet behind them. When they arrived at the property, Chandler didn't spend much time swimming. He spent his time wandering into the woods. He told Catherine and her family he was going to scavenge for firewood or explore the trails. He was seen near the riverbank. He was seen burning trash in the fire pit on the property. To Catherine and her family, he was just being helpful, a polite guest doing his share of the work. In reality, he was turning their family sanctuary into a dumping ground. He buried some remains. He tossed others into the underbrush. He tried to burn more in the outdoor pit. He returned to Windsor with an empty trunk and a maintained lie. But days were passing. The silence from Bart and Krista became deafening. They weren't answering calls. They weren't showing up for work. Neighbors who were used to seeing Bart tend the lawn or Krista walk out to get the mail noticed the stillness. Friends began to text Chandler, asking where his parents were. Chandler knew he couldn't stall forever. If he did nothing, someone would call the police on him. He had to control the narrative before someone else did. So on July 7th, 6 days after the murders, Chandler walked into the police station. He didn't look nervous. He looked like a concerned son, perhaps a bit annoyed at his parents for being irresponsible. He spun a new web of lies. He told the officers that his parents had gone to a cabin in White Lake with another couple for the July 4th weekend. He claimed he didn't know the couple well, just that they were friends from a long time ago. He said they left early in the morning on Friday before the sun was fully up. He even gave them a specific, strange detail. They had taken a large amount of cash and alcohol with them. It was a plausible story on the surface. Parents go on trips. Batteries die. Cell service gets lost in the deep woods of Wisconsin. The police filed a missing persons report and began a standard investigation. They wanted to help this young man find his parents. But almost immediately, the cracks in Chandler's story began to show. Police detectives are trained to look for inconsistencies, for details that don't fit the baseline of truth. Chandler's story was full of them. First, there was the cabin. When police asked for the address so they could send a local deputy to check, Chandler couldn't give it to them. He said he didn't know where it was. When they asked for the name of the other couple, he didn't know that either. He didn't know their phone numbers. For a son who lived at home and was supposedly close to his parents, this lack of basic information was strange. Why would his parents leave with strangers? Why would they take thousands in cash? Then the police visited the Halderson home to look for clues. It was clean, too clean. It didn't smell like a home where people lived. It smelled like a swimming pool. The scent of bleach and cleaning chemicals hung heavy in the air. And then the detectives saw the fireplace. The glass front was missing. The metal was stripped bare. When they asked Chandler about it, he had a quick, rehearsed answer. He said the family dogs had been playing rough and had smashed into the glass, breaking it. He even took off his sock and showed them his injured toe, claiming he cut it while cleaning up the shards of glass the dogs had broken. It was a clever lie, mixing a grain of truth, the cut on his toe, with the fabrication. But the detectives weren't buying it. They noted the lack of glass shards in the carpet. They noted the dogs didn't seem aggressive. They started digging into his background. They contacted SpaceX. They contacted Madison College. And just like Bart Halderson had discovered weeks earlier, the police found nothing. There was no record of a Chandler Halderson employed at SpaceX. No security clearance, no payroll, no offer letter. Madison College confirmed he had attended briefly, but had not been enrolled for more than a year. The perfect son persona evaporated instantly. The police now knew he was a liar. But being a liar doesn't make you a murderer. They needed a body. The turning point came when investigators analyzed Chandler's movements using digital forensics. They saw that on the weekend of July 3rd, he had traveled to the Wisconsin River property. They decided to search the property Catherine's family owned. They brought in a massive search team, including drones and cadaver dogs. These dogs are trained to ignore animal bones, deer, raccoons, and focus only on the specific chemical signature of human decomposition. As the search team moved through the dense brush near the river, battling mosquitoes and heat, one of the officers spotted something odd. A tarp partially buried, looking out of place in the natural landscape of ferns and trees. It looked disturbed. As they pulled back the brush and lifted the tarp, the reality of what Chandler had done came into sharp focus. They found a human torso. It had been mutilated. The limbs had been removed with a saw. It had been shot. It was a gruesome discovery that silenced the search team. Through DNA analysis, they quickly confirmed the identity. It was Bart Halderson. The missing persons case was now a homicide investigation, and Chandler was the only suspect. He was the last person to see them. He had lied about their location. He had lied about his life. Police moved in to arrest him. When they found him, he wasn't grieving. He wasn't frantically searching for his parents or asking for updates. He was at his house, sitting calmly. When the tactical team moved in and the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, his reaction or lack thereof was chilling. He didn't ask why. He didn't scream, "Did you find them?" He didn't ask, "Are they okay?" He simply went silent. He invoked his right to an attorney and shut down. The trial that followed was a spectacle of evidence. The prosecution laid out a digital trail that was impossible to deny. In the modern age, it is nearly impossible to commit a crime without leaving a digital footprint, and Chandler had stomped all over the internet. They had his Google search history. And this is where the modern criminal often fails. They think incognito mode or deleting history saves them. It doesn't. Forensic experts recovered everything. Chandler's search history was a window into a deranged mind. In the quiet morning hours, before the murders, he wasn't searching for jobs or engineering principles. He was searching for phrases like Wisconsin dismembered body found, how to clean up blood, can you burn a body in a fireplace, and body decomposition timeline. He had practically Googled how to get away with murder while his parents were sleeping down the hall. Even more damning, he had captured screenshots on his phone. He had taken a screenshot of the exact location on the map where he dumped his father's body. Why? Perhaps to remember where it was so he could move it later, or perhaps as a sick trophy, a memento of his work. The prosecution brought in the SpaceX emails. They showed the jury how Chandler had created them on his own computer, using similar but incorrect domain names. They played the recordings of the phone calls from college administrators. It was Chandler, using a burner phone he had bought at a local store, pitching his voice or using software to sound different. The jury saw the timeline of the Omar JOFF emails, realizing that Bart Halderson had been communicating with his own son the entire time he thought he was fighting the college bureaucracy. Witness after witness took the stand. Catherine, the girlfriend, testified through tears. She realized she had been a pawn. She realized that the short trip was a body disposal run. She realized that the smell of the fire pit wasn't burning trash, but the burning remains of the people she had hoped would be her in-laws. The SpaceX HR representative testified, simply stating, "We have no record of this individual." But the most chilling piece of evidence wasn't the data, it was the silence. The prosecution played the 911 calls, the police interviews. Chandler's voice never wavered. He sounded bored. He sounded like a customer service agent handling a return, not a son missing his parents. In the courtroom, the cameras focused on his face. He sat stone-faced. He didn't cry when they showed the photos of the dismembered remains. He didn't flinch when they described the saw marks on his father's bones. Even when his brother Mitchell walked out of the courtroom, unable to bear the details, Chandler stared straight ahead, a void where a soul should be. The defense tried to argue. They suggested that maybe he didn't do it, or that the state hadn't proved exactly how it happened since there were no eyewitnesses to the shooting itself. They tried to paint him as a confused kid who lied but wasn't violent. But the jury didn't need to see the murder weapon to know who held it. The SKS rifle had been found hidden in the barn at the farm, buried under clutter. Ballistics matched the casings found in the house. The web of lies had collapsed, trapping Chandler underneath its weight. It took the jury only 2 hours to deliberate. In a case this complex, with this much evidence, 2 hours is nothing. It means there was no debate. It means every single person in that room looked at the evidence and saw pure guilt. They returned to the courtroom to deliver the verdict. Chandler Halderson was found guilty on all counts. First-degree intentional homicide of Bart Halderson. First-degree intentional homicide of Krista Halderson. Mutilating a corpse. Hiding a corpse. False information to police. As the clerk read the word guilty over and over again, Chandler blinked. That was it. No tears. No screaming. Just a slight blink. During the sentencing, the judge looked at Chandler. Judges often see terrible things, but this case was different. It wasn't a drug deal gone wrong. It wasn't a gang fight. It was a son slaughtering the parents who had given him everything, simply because he didn't want to admit he had failed a few classes. The judge noted his complete lack of remorse. He said that for the safety of the community, Chandler could never be allowed to walk free again. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence ensured that he would die in a cage. The boy who pretended to work for SpaceX, who pretended to be an elite diver, who pretended to be the future of the family, would now spend the rest of his natural life in a concrete box measuring 6 by 8 feet. He would stare at cinder block walls. There would be no video games. There would be no internet to create fake personas. There would be no one left to believe his lies. This case serves as a terrifying reminder. We look at our families, our children, and we think we know them. We think we know what's going on in their heads. Bart and Krista Halderson thought they were raising an ambitious, successful young man. They thought his only flaw was maybe being a little lazy with chores or a bit disorganized with money. They interpreted his time in his room as hard work, studying for a bright future. They never imagined that the person they were sleeping down the hall from was capable of such butchery. They never imagined that the golden boy was actually a parasite, feeding off their pride and their finances until he was cornered. In the end, Chandler Halderson wanted a life of ease. He wanted the prestige without the work. He wanted the status without the effort. He wanted to be the hero of the story without ever fighting a battle. And to keep that illusion alive, to keep the fantasy going for just a few more days, he was willing to burn down his entire world. He traded the lives of two people who loved him unconditionally for a few extra weeks of playing video games. Now, the only title he holds isn't engineer or graduate or SpaceX employee. It is simply inmate.